So today I want to talk about kids and the things that they say. Now, depends on who you talk to. Maybe you've got your own memory. Maybe you have your own child has said something before, or a niece or a nephew, or maybe it's somebody else that's told you a story. But there's a whole lot of stories where kids say the darndest things. And what I mean by that is there are lots of reports of kids having an imaginary friend when they're young, kids making comments that I remember my other mommy or my other daddy, my other family. And when pressed, they're remembering another life, which is very confusing to certain people that, believe you YOLO. And then you have other situations where they remember how they died. Again, past life stuff. They also may see spirits or orbs or hear spirits, for example, and they'll tell you these different stories. I remember my own child when I was talking to him one day, and I was asking him, I was kind of pressing him a little bit, is there any other stuff, blah 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 blah. And he actually admitted to me that he sees spirits. He sees them in orbs, and he can hear his spirit guide. He can actually hear several spirits, talking. And he's even told me that the spirits will help him in school on tests and that sort of thing. Now, I also watched a series called The Ghost Inside My Child. And this series was pretty crazy. It happened to be around children that remembered a past life. And so what was happening was some of them were having night terrors, remembering how they died. Some of them remembered very specific things about a previous life they had. Now, some of the lives were not immediate. Some of them were way back. But some of the lives were, literally the previous lifetime. And, that confused some of the parents because they're like, what is my child saying? My child this doesn't seem to be made up stuff, that he just pulled this out of his brain like, da, 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 making something up. And instead, they decided to investigate. So the Ghost Inside My Child series is all about investigating these kids and memories of their past lives. And there was a couple that were really wild, and they were able to trace back and figure out who they were. One of the stories, and I want to bring this up because obviously it's very close in our timeline, and it's something that has basically impacted all of us. There was one child that remembers working on top of one of the World Trade Centers when it fell. And I know that 9/11 is something that's, pretty near and dear to all of us for different reasons. And so, of course, this is something that, they wanted to investigate. And what they did was they found a lot of information that he was saying. And then they found somebody who would have been this person's best friend, or maybe not best friend, but a very close associate of this person who knew him. And so they brought the boy together and the man was asking him questions. And at the end of it, the man goes, there's no way that this child could have known these things. Like, there's just no way. And what's really wild was the man telling the child that you weren't even supposed to be there that day. You actually had the day off of work, but you came in because somebody else got sick. And so, them going through these experiences of remembering. There was one story that I actually thought was a pretty beautiful story. There was a mother that had lost her son in a pretty brutal way. He had been bullied and actually been bullied to death. And she had never recovered from it. It pretty much crippled her for quite a long time. And what happened was, the son was reborn to another mom, another family, and he kept making references to, his other mom and being scared and all sorts of things. And that mom felt like, I've got to explore this further. So she ends up figuring out certain things, and then figuring out, based off of what he had said, and I believe some drawings that he had drawn, and then went and looked for all the kids that met the criteria that had died in a certain time period. And she brought back a bunch of these pictures and she put them out in front of him and said, do any of these look familiar to you? And she already kind of had an idea of who she thought he might be. But he, boop, picked out the ones like, that's me. That's who I was. So then she goes and they find his previous mother, who's still alive, and the mom and the son sit down, and she's talking to him, but he's in this new body, right? It doesn't look like her son, right? She's used to her son in the way that he looked for her, and as she's going through and she's asking him this question, she's realizing, oh my God, this really is my son reborn in a new avatar with this new family. On the one hand, it was, kind of sad, right? Because she didn't get to continue have the experience of her son. However, in the end of this moment, it was really beautiful because it allowed several different layers of healing. It allowed healing to happen within the child himself. He actually, after the meeting of the two of them and the discussing of things, he stopped having the night terrors. It allowed him to be happier and healthier in his current life with his current mom. And then the other beautiful thing was the new mom allowed the son and the old mom to continue to have, a friendship of sorts, a relationship. And as a result, it allowed the, original mom to have a sense of healing that, what, maybe my son did die and he died in an awful way, but he's proof that he's actually right here in front of me. And it allowed her to actually come out of this years long, terrible grief that she had been crippled with and actually see the future in a new light. And, it allowed a whole lot of healing in different ways. And I sit there and I think about that for a lot of people when we think that we only live one life, that, when somebody dies, especially a child, we get really upset and we're unable to kind of move past that grief because we feel like they're gone forever. But, is that really true? There are stories where you'll have a child that'll say, I remember when I was, in your womb, before. And the mom will be like, that's not possible, honey. And she's like, no, I remember. And she's like, well, I had a miscarriage. Yeah, that was me. And the mom's like, oh my God, right? And there's a lot of actual stories about miscarriages even where the child that they actually didn't end up bringing to life, right, and grows up several years, remembers actually being the miscarried child. And that's also something that when I look at people and they're really upset about, miscarriages, that who's to say that the soul that was tied to that miscarriage isn't really just sitting right in front of you already, with the child that you actually did end up getting later on. Because there's a lot of stories like that, which is pretty wild. And then you also have the stories about imaginary friends. And I sit there and I think about in the spiritual community how we talk about a child is very open, until they're, right around like 6, 7, 8, something like that. And then, what happens is a lot of life kind of comes at them and starts shutting them down. And so when you have kids that talk about like imaginary friends or, I see dead people, right? And if you have parents or family that's like, no, that's not real, or no, you didn't, or that's not possible, or stop making up stories, right? That's when we start to discount children's reality. And I think it's actually very dangerous for us to discount a child's reality because what is happening to them is very real to them. And I feel like they're trying to actually give us clues that there may be more going on around us than we realize. And, us old people, right, we get really rigid in our thinking of stuff, whereas children are very open and creative and the world is, the world's their oyster. And I find it interesting when you look at a lot of people today, I feel like they're doing a lot better job of allowing children to be open. Oh, really? You have an imaginary friend? Well, what's your imaginary friend's name? And they do more of asking, well, what is it that the two of you talk about? And what is it that, the two of you, want to do? Is there any other, stories that they tell you? And actually kind of more digging into it instead of discounting the reality. And regardless of whether they grow out of, having an imaginary friend or not, they still are providing this space for their child to be open, right? And allow that to kind of come out. And I also find it really interesting that we sometimes will discount kids' reality in the area of spirits, but then how many of us have seen a ghost, or we've seen something weird, or we feel like we've seen somebody that's, been possessed by something before. I've met a lot of people who've actually been like, oh, I've seen somebody like possessed by something. And it's pretty interesting that, we may in our own minds be like, oh, we've seen it, but we may discount it with kids. And yet I feel like kids are kind of the clues to a lot of things that maybe we need to take a harder look at. I find that, kids are amazing in many different ways. And there are a lot of kids that will tell you things because they're able to commune with the spirit, right? They're able to see the spirit and know what the problem is with the spirit. And I think that gives people an uncomfort level, because then it makes them realize that, wait, if the spirit is here, then that means the spirit didn't go to, heaven, right? And if they didn't go to heaven, then that means that, wait a minute, what are they doing, right? Is earth hell? Did they get stuck in limbo? What's going on? And it makes an adult's mind a little bit more inflexible, because they have their own preconceived ideas as far as what happens when you die, right? Where do spirits go? And if they've got spirits hanging around, that kind of comes in a conflict with, the place in the sky. And it doesn't even matter if you're Christian or if you're, Islamic, and, you believe you're going to get 25 virgins in heaven, whatever. But it definitely makes you say, wait a minute, something else is going on here. And I do find it really interesting, whether kids talk about, my mommy from another life, and, mom's going, what do you mean? I'm your mom. I'm your mom. And then them being like, no, I had another mom. And, then if they start talking about like, I died in a car wreck, or, died traumatically, the parent gets really concerned. And then they start trying to figure out, how would they even know something like that? Did they watch TV where they saw a car wreck and now they associated somehow that they died in a car wreck because they saw it on some little program here, whatever? Instead of being like, wait a minute, okay, maybe they're remembering something from their previous life. Now, Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker actually proved that reincarnation is real. And one of the ways that they proved it was through children. And through children who remembered past lives, to which then they went and hunted down the families, right, of the person in question. Now, sometimes it didn't go well, because it became very confusing to the little child of, okay, yeah, I remember that life, but now I'm here and I'm doing this, and what's going on, right? But they were able to prove that we are reincarnating, and they did a lot of their work through children and finding those people and finding, the scenarios that happened. So I definitely encourage you, if you have any children, ask them, what kind of, weird things they see. You might be surprised. Maybe they do see spirits. Maybe they see them as orbs. Maybe they actually see an outline of them. Maybe they actually can hear spirits. And, maybe they do have memories of, a previous lifetime. I do know that doctors don't know what night tremors are, what causes it, and there's no medication for it. But from everything that I've kind of heard, it definitely sounds like there's a correlation between night tremors and dying a traumatic death in a previous life. And so I sit there and I think about how, if children are bringing that back up, as far as their previous death, but, in their mind, in their sleep, right, and their brain's trying to sort through it, that could definitely give you, night terrors. And then eventually, you grow out of it. So I hope that this has been an interesting video for you. If you have any comments, definitely feel free to drop any of your interesting stories that you know about, or cool things that your kids said, or kids have said, in the comments. And if you like the video, definitely like it. Otherwise, subscribe to my channel. And if you are interested in any life coaching, then, especially spiritual life coaching, then look at my website, talktopalace.com. And otherwise, have a great day.